Hey, I'm Laura Bennett. I host the afternoon show at Hope 1032 here in Sydney. On the back of the civil rights movement happening around the world right now, we wanted to start a conversation to understand what's happening in the States, but also how we can learn from it for our own experiences here in Australia. Tim Ross is the lead pastor of Embassy City Church in Irving, Texas. He's the author of Upset the World and the presenter of the YouTube series Upset the News. His church is famously multiracial, and as an African American himself, he's right at the center of the discussions happening at the moment. Now, before we jump in, by no means can we cover in this hour or so everything that the Black Lives Matter movement represents, but our hope is that it would be one of many conversations that help us all think about our role in this time in history, and for those who follow Jesus, how we can serve others and help those who are hurting so much right now. I hope you enjoy it. What a pleasure to have with us Tim Ross from Embassy City Church. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
I'm so grateful to be here with you.
Now, I met you back at C3 Presence Conference a couple of years ago, and you and your church, you're famously multicultural. You're a really great leader from everything that I've seen. And so I feel like there's no better person to be able to talk to right now about the racial divide happening in America, how this is affecting us more broadly. So first of all, let me ask you, what are you seeing and what are you feeling right now about what's going on?
I'm heartbroken. I'm angry. I'm saddened that this still is a reality in 2020. But this is a long history over hundreds of years in this country that I feel has crescendoed to a generation that is more galvanized, more digitized, and more technologically connected than any previous generation prior to this one. So there is a massive outcry against injustice in a way that we've never seen in America up until this point.
And I think I saw someone say, because it's such a global movement, there's all 50 American states, and at the time it was about 18 other countries that had got on board with Black Lives Matter protests, making it the biggest civil rights movement ever. So it's a huge thing. But why do you think the death of George Floyd really was a tipping point? Because unfortunately, we've seen that happen, particularly in America, so many times before. We've got our own story of, racial tension within Australia. Why was George Floyd's death what really sort of led us to this point particularly?
Yeah, you know what? I think George Floyd's death epitomized what Black Americans have felt in this country for hundreds of years. And it was this: when you saw that officer's knee on George Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes, with the man begging just to get air. He wasn't screaming, "I'm not guilty." He wasn't saying that, "I can't believe you guys are doing this." He was just trying to breathe. What it epitomized, with his hands behind his back and a knee in his neck, was what so many Black people have felt in this country over hundreds of years. And that is, above civil rights, above trying to get a hand up, above trying to get a hand out, above trying to get equality, we just want to breathe. And when that basic dignity of life is taken in the manner that it was taken, outrage is the result.
Yeah, and what's become the, I guess, sort of catch cry of a movement, "I can't breathe," that seems to stand for so much more in terms of carrying the weight of racial prejudice, the weight of a trauma that really just doesn't let you open up and doesn't give you that freedom to take a deep breath. Do you feel like that's kind of what it's saying?
That's exactly what it's saying. So many people have tried to politicize what Black Lives Matter means in America. It might have a different context somewhere else. And there's even some people in America that have politicized it for their own, personal gain as it relates to politics. But at the heart of those three words, Black Lives Matter, is this cry for America to own up to the fact that racism has had and continues to have a deep and lasting impact and wound on the Black Americans that still live in this country.
Yeah, I saw a great poster actually earlier this morning that said, matter is the minimum. Black lives are worthy. Black lives are significant. Black lives have purpose. And
Right.
it just got me, because I know that people have politicized that so much, and it touches on so many different cultures in different ways. But I just thought, oh my gosh, like, people are really declaring some hugely powerful stuff in this really challenging time. One thing that I found kind of puzzling, one of the narratives that a lot of the protesters are trying to shift is that Black people are dangerous, the generalizations that young guys in hoodies can't be trusted, all of that sort of stuff. And yet we've seen, obviously, some really violent protests. Yes, there's been a stack of peaceful ones as well, so I do want to acknowledge that. But for the people that have approached things in violence, why do you think they've taken that course of action, knowing that it doesn't really support the cause?
Yeah, we've been trying to contextualize the riots for some time now. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said years ago that a riot is the language of the unheard. And the example that I try to give people that, kind of passively say, well, they're just tearing down their own neighborhood, and what good does that do? Well, this is the best example I can give. If you were in your home and let's just say you were married, okay? And when you came home, you saw your spouse in the bed with another person. You'd probably pick up a bat and start busting some things up in your own house that might potentially include your spouse and maybe the person that they were in the bed with. Now, some might think that's a crass analogy, but I'm trying to get to the heart of what happens when you are in your own home, but in this case for a community, in your own neighborhood. When you're angry, you reach for the closest thing to you and you break it. Whether that would be a glass in the kitchen if you found out a loved one died, or if you found out that someone you love went to jail unjustly, you might punch a hole through the wall. You think, well, that's your own wall. Why would you punch a hole in it? Well, when you're angry and you don't have words to express what you've been trying to say, you reach for the closest thing to you and you break it. If that's what we do as individuals, a community reaches for their neighborhood and they break it. It's temporary insanity. No, it doesn't make any sense. No, it's not logical. But in the heat of the moment, when anger spills over and it doesn't have words to label exactly what it is, or I have the words, but nobody wants to hear them, or they're just outright ignored, that's when we see things getting broken up.
And for better or worse, it's meant that a lot of people are hearing what's going on between the people that are doing it peacefully and the global attention that the riots have got. There is a huge conversation happening now that maybe would have happened at a later date. We don't know, but here it is. It's happening now. It's an incredible thing, as you mentioned, that Black America, brown, people of color, everyone who's felt some kind of racial marginalization, there is a lot of research that says that affects the psychology and the actual DNA, genetic makeup of individuals having carried that for so long. What do you think the impact of this support and this conversation is going to be on the generations of people who've been carrying such heavy psychological trauma for so long?
Well, I can tell you the type of impact it's having even now. In the last 12 to 15 days, there have been more conversations with my white brothers and sisters, with their Black brothers and sisters, than has probably ever happened in the last 100 years in this country. White men and women who have been living in this country for years and maybe have never even had a conversation that goes beyond the surface of what a Black man or woman has struggled with in this country, are having the type of deep conversations that is bringing lasting healing to the souls of Black men and women. We've even had groups of white people stand in proxy for those other white people that were racist or did show overt signs of prejudice, and they are apologizing. And I can't even describe to you the type of weeping that is coming out of grown, successful Black men and women, when a white person stands in proxy and just says, I apologize. We have not been asking for much. It's not like we've been asking for a transfer of $1 trillion and then we can go set up our own little society so we can be okay.
Yeah.
Black people have had a different experience in this country than other people that have migrated to this country, whether we're talking about the Italians or the Irish or people from Asia or people from the islands. Black people were brought here. So Black Americans, Afro Americans, as we would be called or classified in this season, we're even having a different experience than Africans who migrated over here. It's not that they haven't been discriminated against, but they don't have, like you just talked about, the years of trauma in their DNA that would make them flinch over the signs of racism that they feel. Can I share something about your country?
Yeah, go ahead.
That completely made me fall in love with it. The year was January of 2010. It was my first time coming to Australia in my entire life. And I came to Australia to preach at a church, and I was here for 11 days. When I came back home, I told my wife, Juliet, would you want to move to Australia with me?
We'd have you. Come on over.
And she said, like, why would you just say that out of nowhere? We had 2 young children. She was like, you want me to move 8,000 miles away from my family? But here was the reason why it impacted me so. Australia was the first continent that was predominantly Caucasian that I had ever been to in my life that I never felt that racist undertone, subtle or overt. Because when you've been exposed to prejudice and racism for hundreds of years, you can feel it coming from a person. In the same way you could feel if you went to a dinner party and there were some girls there that just didn't like you, right? You just felt some weird vibes coming from them. You couldn't put your finger on it, but you knew they didn't like you. Australia was the first predominantly Caucasian country that I didn't feel that. And it was enough to make me want to move on the spot. Like, learn to drive on the left-hand side of the road and leave and renounce my citizenship to America just so my kids could experience something different. It's a beautiful thing that I think we take for granted. But when I got to travel there, it made all the sense in the world to go, oh, this could feel different for a new generation. If we could get that here, that would be beautiful.
Oh, I'm so glad that's been your experience, because I know that even in our own country, maybe in the diversity of states and territories we have, there are places where our own people, our own Indigenous culture very much feels marginalized. And there are times where I think there's probably subtle racism in Australia, but this window of time is really causing each of us, I know individually, to ask, hey, is there anything in my life that I'm doing that I'm unaware of, that is maybe making me have a prejudice towards certain people and not others, and our nation asking itself too, maybe we don't seem racist, but are we? Or are there things we need to address? So one of the things I'm so encouraged by in the midst of all of this is that conversations are happening. Like you say, people are talking to their Black brothers and sisters, people are learning how to speak the language of multiple cultures and respect them in ways that, from my perspective at least, I feel like political correctness really did us a disservice, because while it was intended to make sure no one was offended and that everybody was included, it's also meant people are so silent because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to ask a question that could offend. And so you end up with people keeping the beliefs they have or the ignorance they have and having no safe place to ask questions or to voice their opinions that maybe they need to change. So from your perspective, what can we do to continue to facilitate safe spaces where people can be vulnerable and admit that maybe they're naive, but be able to learn, be able to ask questions and change some of those internal attitudes that silence really covers over?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question to ask. And so it's a two-pronged approach for me. First, across culture, we need to have safe spaces and places where people can have conversations without offense. which means that you need to be able to ask any question that you feel like you need to ask without me being so triggered that by just you merely asking the question, I've accused you of something that may not even be in your heart. You were just trying to get clarity, right? And so that we need to have safe spaces across culturally where we can get context and have an understanding about what people that are different from us are going through. Secondly, once we've been armed with that information, we have to become mirrors to our families, friends, and our communities that are homogenized. And so one of the ways that I'm trying to give this as an example is if you were to do maybe 3 or 4 in-person meetings today, and at the end of your third, and they were back to back, and at the end of your third meeting, you went to the restroom to wash your hands. And when you looked up in the mirror, you saw that you had a green booger on the top of your lip. You would ask yourself 2 questions, right? First of all, how long has this been here, right? You'd be mortified. And the second question you would ask is, how come nobody told me? Well, one of the main things that I'm trying to be a champion of right now is for every single ethnicity to be a mirror to their own communities. I need Black people to be mirrors to their Black friends and family. I need white people to be mirrors to their white friends and family, so that not only in public, but in private, when we hear something that's racist, when we hear something that's prejudiced, because we've had so much cross-cultural conversation, we can take that back to our more homogenized locations and go, you can't say that. That's absolutely racist, or that's ridiculously insensitive, or that act or behavior is something that is really divisive. And I don't think you should say that anymore. When we're challenging people, not only in public, but in private, that's when we're really going to see this change.
So getting really practical for a second then, if someone wanted to have a conversation with you who was a non-Black, non-brown, non-colored person wanting to talk to you about maybe pain that you'd experienced or what your perspective is on issues of race, what would be the best way to approach that conversation with sensitivity and with awareness of the fact that it could actually be a trigger for some people?
Absolutely. What's been beautiful that I've been finding out, and I've heard this from so many of my Black friends and family, is they have their white friends and their white neighbors are actually reaching out and saying, may I have a conversation with you? Can you tell me how you feel? There's a great guy out here in the States. His name is Dr. John Townsend. He and Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a book called Boundaries. Well, last week he used his platform and had a video chat, and he only invited Black people to come speak. And what he said was so powerful. He said, I don't want to have a dialogue with you. I want you to have a monologue. I just want to hear what you have to say. And I want to listen and I want to learn so I can understand better how to support and how to help you. These conversations are happening because people are being curious, they're being humble, and they're not approaching it so defensively. When I tell my white friends and family that they have white privilege, they're not getting mad and trying to say, no, I don't. Yes, you do. In the same way, being from LA, the inner city of LA, I have Black privilege in the hood. And if I went to the hood and I had you with me, you would be relying on me to use my Black privilege to make sure that you felt safe.
Yeah, I'm not going there without you.
Right? That you felt accepted and that you felt like you had access to everything else that we were enjoying. And so all I've been telling my white friends and family here is that I have Black privilege in the hood. You have it everywhere else. And we just want you to use it to make sure that we are made safe, that we have access, and that we are accepted and received equally, right? This is why BLM is the bare minimum, right? To choke a man out like a dog in the street. Dogs, PETA would have went crazy if an officer would have done this to a dog. Yet we have pictures in our Smithsonian Institutes showing the lifeless bodies of Black men and women hung from trees.
Yeah.
And so matter is the bare minimum. We want to matter first, and then we would love to get a little bit of a tweak to the Constitution that called Black people 3/5 of a person.
I cannot believe that. When I only recently came across that, and I cannot believe that.
Yeah. So when racism was at the very outpouring of America's cement, right, to secure the foundation, there's a lot of work to do here. A lot of work to do. But we don't have to wait on America politically to move on this. These conversations are doing more than I think even America intended them to do. And that's why we're seeing such receptivity to the movement for justice around the world.
And one of the best attributes, and maybe one of the worst at times, of the current generation is that we're super proactive, we're super vocal, we fight for causes, we're not going to let justice stand no matter what the context for it is. When you look at white culture particularly, what can we be doing in the ways that we support, in the ways that we champion, in the ways that we peacefully protest? How can we do all of those things but not be patronizing? Because for me personally, I feel like I want to support people who need help, but I also know that I am not a Black person. So I don't want to speak up or say the wrong thing for a group that I'm inherently not genetically part of. So how can we talk in a way that isn't patronizing, but that actually does good?
Yeah. So what I would say is, let me tell you what I have said to all of my white friends and family. Your voice is so important, because when you speak, and here's what I had to tell one of my friends: if I yell, I'm considered the angry Black man. When my white friends yell, they're passionate white people. And so the voice of our white brothers and sisters is incredibly important. When it is spoken clearly and it's spoken loudly, people listen. It's one of the most amazing things, one of the most amazing privileges you've been given. I don't shame you or any other of my white brothers and sisters for having white privilege. I just want to tell you how powerful it is and how to use it, in the same way that Uncle Ben told young Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility, right? You can't have it and not use it for good for all people. And so your voice is important. Your presence is important. I mean, you showing up in your beautiful white skin literally legitimizes our outcry. In the same way, in the 60s, when Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream speech, white people's presence legitimized the words that he said. We can't do this by ourselves. If we're the only ones that are raising our voices, or the only ones that are showing up to be present, we will never get the movement like we will get when we all come together to do it unified.
And there's probably a lot of people that don't realize that, and it's kind of crazy to think that that's the way it is. But you're so right that, I mean, I remember someone even saying to me just about living in Australia had nothing to do with race. It was like, you've been blessed to live in this country. Don't feel bad about it, but what are you going to do about it? When you have such an awareness, no matter what context you're in, all of us have a level of blessing and privilege and opportunity.
That's right.
To do with it to serve and not just hold it all to our own. So I think perhaps for white people, particularly on the issue of race, this is now, as you say, a time where we do look at how we use our voices. And one of the criticisms I've seen come out in this time in a lot of conversations, particularly on social media where it's all happening, is that the church has let so many communities, whether they're Black, coloured or otherwise, the church has been perceived as letting them down. From your perspective, what has the church done wrong? Where has the church missed the mark in the conversation about race?
Yeah, well, in America, I can say that the most egregious place where the church has missed the mark is in the area of their theology. They have allowed American culture to influence their theology more than kingdom culture to influence their theology. So what's literally happened is we have more American churches uh, 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 confessing the name of Jesus. Then we have kingdom churches confessing the name of Jesus. And so when Martin Luther King makes a statement like, 11 a.m. is the most segregated hour in America, because those are the times where everyone is going to their own church, right? As opposed to us being a body. It's a white church and a black church and a Hispanic church. The church is the church has been sucked into America's narrative to the point that we have black churches and white churches, black preachers and white preachers, black Christians and white Christians. When in the kingdom, race was never mentioned. It was Jew and Gentile. It was those that God made a covenant relationship with, starting with Abraham in Genesis 11, and everybody else, right? Like, didn't matter what nationality you were, what ethnicity you were. If you weren't a Jew, you were considered everybody else. Hey, what makes you a Gentile? The fact that you're not a Jew. And so in Christ's body, according to Ephesians chapter number 2, in Christ's own body, he took Jews and Gentiles and made in himself a new people group. And until we reset back to what Bible says we are, that when we become believers in Jesus Christ, our identity actually supersedes our ethnicity. In America, there's too much patriotism in the nation amongst believers than there is a fidelity to Jesus Christ and our identity to all be brothers and sisters in Christ. And so until we kind of get that theology back to where it's supposed to be, the church is going to always be guilty of falling into one of America's many narratives.
Yeah, I think you explain it so well, because when you're looking at the biblical approach to race, as you say, Jesus dissolved it and said, hey, yeah, sure, the Jews are my chosen people, but anyone can be part of that. He literally opened the floodgates wide and just made everybody Christ follower or not, and I think that, it's a beautiful example. You're so right in the ways that if we get back to that, we can do so much. We can really do so much more. I wanted to ask you this question. I know that I'm preempting it. I'm giving it a disclaimer. It probably speaks of a time where a utopian world where a lot of these issues have already been addressed. But one thing I'm conscious of is that in hearing a lot of the conversation so far from people like yourself, there's stories being told of how parents teach their children how to behave around police so that you don't have to fear for your life, how to behave in a store so that people don't think you've stolen something, which is tragic in so many levels.
Yeah.
But for the next generation, and I think of this too, even in regards to women and the Me Too movement, if we teach our children the exact same thing that the current generation were taught, that, cops are dangerous, or take it to the Me Too thing, men are dangerous, then the cycle is going to continue. And we're not, from my perspective, we're keeping a wound raw by continuing to teach it, or to teach the fear, or to give it a legacy of marginalization.
Yeah.
What sort of stories do parents need to teach their children, tell their children, so that people can move forward and not kind of carry all of that history without negating it, without belittling it, but healing the wound as opposed to keeping it open?
It's a beautiful question to ask, and I'm gonna bring my parents into this conversation now, Charles and Maxine Ross. So my mother was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and my father was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. The South during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when they would have been young adults, was completely different than what it is now. And my parents, being products of the civil rights movement, had me and my older brother and my younger brother. And here was the beautiful thing about what I loved about growing up in their home. They had experienced racism firsthand. They had experienced segregation firsthand. They had experienced what it was to sit on the back of a bus. They had experienced what it was to drink from a fountain that was only for Black people. They knew what it was to go to a Black restroom, to go to the back of the restaurant to pick up food because they couldn't walk through the front door. Yet they looked me in the eyes and said, don't allow anything that you see in this country to make you think that all white people are evil.
Mm.
Don't allow anything that you see in this country to make you think that all police are bad. And my mom had a little extra weight behind those words because she actually worked for the Los Angeles Police Department for 30 years.
Wow.
So we have a very high regard for law enforcement within our family. And I went to school and studied administration of justice because I wanted to be a homicide detective. Obviously, God had other plans for me to preach, but if I had it my way, I would be in law enforcement right now. And so because one thing is true doesn't mean that the other automatically has to be true. There are some very abusive police officers in law enforcement. Yet there are hundreds of thousands of beautiful police officers who have dedicated their life and put they risk their lives every day to protect and serve their communities.
Mm.
And so it's not a matter of either or, it's both and. And we have to be able to address the evil that we see when we see it, and also be able to celebrate the good that we see coming out as well. One thing that America has become masterful at through media is leading with bad news. One of my friends that used to work in media literally said the motto of the network was, if it bleeds, it leads. So I don't want anybody to get sucked into Fox, MSN, CNN, NBC, ABC, Al Jazeera, BBC, whatever it is. We can't, I'm speaking as a believer now. We cannot allow the narratives that come from these spaces that don't have Christ at the epicenter to be what we rehearse privately and publicly.
That's a good word. If you're going to preach, I'm going to respond like you're preaching, for sure. And I think it kind of takes us to a point where we realize that not only are the voices that we use powerful, but as you said it, not all white people are bad, and not all white people are good either. Like there's a lot, there's a lot of criminals within our own color as well. When there's a movement like this, I feel like it can just redirect the hate. Or again, I reference Me Too. It can just make middle-aged white men the enemy when not all of them are.
Right.
So how do you think we can facilitate this time, this moment in a way that doesn't just redirect the hatred elsewhere, but actually deals with the core issues in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think we have to keep the focus on the issue at hand. In America, we want racism to end. Now, we know that is a blanket statement that has various levels and subcategories to its solutions. But up front, we want police brutality to end. No matter if it's coming from a white man, a black man, an Asian man, a Hispanic man, we don't want people who have a badge to believe that they are above the law.
Yeah.
And so we want every action of injustice from a police department to be met with swift accountability and very, very strong consequences. If you kill somebody and it's unjustified, you go to prison, just like the person that would go to prison was shooting at you. If you are found to be mistreating a person, we want you to be suspended indefinitely or to go to some type of sensitivity training with a certificate that proves that you have changed, with a probationary period long enough to make sure that you're not just faking it so you can get back to quote unquote normal.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We want to see tangible measurements of how accountability is going to hold people to do the right thing, not just because they're reacting to a protest, but policy that's going to change over time.
It's really just a desire for consequence.
That's all we want.
Right.
That's all we want.
And
I just wanted to say, I took my parents to the Smithsonian African American Museum in Washington, D.C. in December of 2019. And what was interesting is there was a it's a horrific picture of some black men that were hung by a tree. And all the white men are facing the camera, business suits, overcoats, and hats on. And some of them are actually smiling in the camera. Next to a picture of the uniform that the Ku Klux Klan used to wear, which also had a hood that went over their head. And what I realized was the Ku Klux Klan wasn't using the hood to hide their identity so they wouldn't get in trouble. They were using it as a sign of intimidation and fear. The truth was these white men could hang black men because they knew they wouldn't be held accountable for their actions. Mm. And so what we're saying is, in a society that condoned the murder of black men and women without consequence, we are saying now we want people to be held accountable, and we want their consequences to be as severe as it would be if a black man killed another black man in the street.
Yeah. And I think now is the time where we're so much more likely even, I think, to see that happen. You know, people are fed up, they're vocal, they've got enough people power behind them that I think hopefully, and I mean, this is my hopeful, optimistic self, maybe now finally we will get that. And one of the things that has been on my mind, and this touches on your pastor's heart, this is a question for your pastor's heart. If you're somebody who has been hurt, marginalized, abused in any kind of way, whether it's based on the color of your skin, your gender, your religious beliefs, anything, I think it can be really easy to then perceive the world through a lens that says the way everyone is treating you is because of your color, is because of your gender, is because of those religious beliefs. Mm-hmm. How can we bring ourselves to a point where even if we have been hurt, we don't always think it's the reason why people are responding to us a certain way? You know, as a woman, there's times where people are just mean to me, and it's not because I'm a woman. It's just because they're being mean. How can we address those perceptions so that we don't lock ourselves into a mindset that says, I'm being treated this way because of who I am?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always taken any encounters I have with humanity around the world on a case-by-case basis. So I individualize as opposed to generalize. That's number one. If you have been hurt by a specific people group over and over and over again, you have to realize that those are still individual situations that you've gone through, but you now have empirical data to say, man, this has come from this particular ethnicity or culture over and over again. My advice for you is that you make sure that you get out of your heart anything that would turn you into another version of them. Right? So now you become the person that hates or stereotypes or shows a prejudice based on what's been exposed to you by the same. All we're doing is flipping an emotion and giving it back the same type of energy. I think counseling very important. A relationship with God is very, very important. And an understanding that we have to be able to compartmentalize people's behavior. Let me give you Jesus's epitomization of this. While on the cross being executed for sins he did not commit, he is actually forgiving those that were doing the action. And so a lot of people will say, well, you can't forgive them until you've gone through a process. You need to be angry. But our chief apostle modeled for us this beautiful picture of forgiveness while the act was actually being done. And he makes this important statement that gives the context that I think we all need. Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. I don't believe anybody who is racist, prejudiced, bigoted, chauvinistic, any of the isms that are out there knows what they're doing in context to a relationship with God. Outside of a relationship with God, everybody is doing what they feel is best for them.
This kind of time has, I think, shed light on a lot of things. And I saw in a conversation that T.D. Jakes recently had, he said we need to get to a point where we don't view things as Black issues, but human issues. Would you extend that to this current context and say that we shouldn't really view this as an American issue? Because a lot of people go, this is happening in America. We should actually view this as an issue for mankind.
Absolutely. You know, I think one of the things that this is exposing is prejudice in the world. Where do we prejudge people based on the color of their skin or who they worship or who they marry or the way that they dress? And what we're saying is that needs to end everywhere. Right? The epitomization of the golden rule is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That very basic principle, after loving God, is how we should extend our expression of love to our fellow human beings, right? And so there are rights that are deserved, no matter what your belief system is, no matter what your political stance may be, no matter what style of dress you may have. There are certain things that you have a right to because you are human. That makes you different from any other one of God's creations, and that's how we should be looking at all of humanity.
And it's coming off the back of a lot of conversation, as you've said, about the current time, where America's been in the past, where the world has been on issues of race particularly. And as encouraging as it is to see so many people being vocal about these issues, we know in America, you've already had a lot of civil rights movements in the past. And unfortunately, these are still issues that are alive and well. Yeah. After all of these protests, what do you think comes next? What are the steps that will bring healing and resolution in the long term?
Yeah. So from a faith perspective, I see that the more we have these conversations, the more that we see people's hearts broken over what God's heart is broken over. We're going to see a change in the way that we preach on justice, in the way that we activate believers to speak out against it, and in the way our communities are shaped and formed. I believe there's going to be a lot more what I would call cross-pollination of ethnicities and cultures after we come out of a full quarantine, right? Whenever those measures are fully up, I expect a lot of white people to start going to more churches of color. I expect a lot of more Black people to start going to more multi-ethnic churches, because they're going to go, you know what? I can't get a true picture if the only thing that I'm surrounded by is people that look like me. And so in those major cities, I don't expect that to happen in a place like, Billings, Montana, that's 97% Caucasian as a state. But in those areas where diversity is really, really the norm, I expect there to be a lot more movement there. That's what's going to happen on the faith side. On the state side, or what America is gonna do, is right now it's already happening. There are so many major corporations drawing their line in the sand as it relates to their stance on racism. Ben & Jerry's came out and said that white supremacy must end, right? And I think every Black person is about to get a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, whether they're lactose intolerant or not, okay? So, but also I believe that there's going to be more political change, because Generation Z, the oldest of them, are at the voting age now. They're over 18. And they're going to make their vote count for people that are going to actually stand up for justice. One of the things that has been very, very sad in American politics is the way that they play the evangelical vote or the Christian vote. They'll say the buzzwords to give the appearance that, hey, I share the same faith you do, but then they have actions that are actually antithetical to the faith that they say that they espouse to. So politically, laws are going to change, voting's going to change. People that we thought would be in the Senate or in Congress are going to be voted out. There's going to be this new generation that rises up to really hold people accountable and affect change long term.
It's certainly been a time with a lot of self-reflection and a lot of people thinking about what their role is going to be. And as you mentioned, coming out of lockdown, I just suddenly remembered for a second, oh my gosh, yes, we are also in a pandemic, which I hadn't forgotten. But, between everything that's happening, it's like, wow, the heaviness that's on people, the time of reflection, the time to just analyze and reflect on every part of how we live our lives, very much seems to be now. And if you're somebody, I know this for myself. I've never thought of myself as white. I've never thought of you as Black. I've never looked at people based on color. And I have thought that's probably a good thing. But I think in this time I've gone, wait a minute, maybe it's not actually, because if you don't see people's color, you don't see the boxes they can fit into, you don't see the things that could be their pain points, or in a way your own privilege either. So I feel like for all of us in our unique ways, we're learning different things about how we see the world. So if you're a white person in this current time and you've been hearing conversations like what we're having now, you've been immersed in everything that's going on social media, and you go, hang on, maybe I am a little bit racist and I didn't even realize. Maybe I have been staying in a bubble that is too much like with people just like me. I haven't been actively pursuing diverse relationships. What would you say to that person, how they can take that realization and then do something positive with it?
So glad you asked that question. Admit it, quit it, forget it. And then open yourself up. Again, be curious. The most interesting people are the most curious people. They're the ones that don't believe they know it all, and they have something else to learn today. And so if I met a racist white man today and he said, I've spent my whole life thinking you were beneath me, and today I see it different, I'm not gonna scold him for the many years he was a racist. I'm going, class is in session. Tell you what you've been missing by being mad at me and people that look like me. Your life has not been as interesting as it will be now. The fact that you just gained a black friend, right? Or an Indian friend, or a Chinese friend, or whoever it is. Let's become curious about people. Let's stop saying that we don't see color, and let's be honest about what we're really saying. I don't judge you differently because of color. But I do see that you're a beautiful white woman. I do see that you're a beautiful black person. I do see that you are a beautiful Asian person. You have a culture and an experience that if I don't know about, I'm actually limited in how much I know this world and how much I know the world around me. And so can we go to lunch? And I just want to listen. I want to know why you wear your traditional garb during these months. I want to know why St. Patrick's Day is so important to you. I want to know why Anzac Day is so meaningful. I want to know why, right? Let's just get curious. And the more curious we are, the more we'll learn. And the more we learn, the more we'll be able to teach others.
And I think, thank goodness, this window of time has given people permission to be curious, permission to ask questions. And I honestly just pray that stays with us, that we don't have it now and then in 6 months forget that we can have these conversations, Tim. So thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Hey, let me just say thank you so much for using your platform to have a conversation that is going to bring a lot of people context. It is brave right now for these conversations to be had, and you've just given other people permission to be as brave as you. So I just want to thank you and your entire team for opening up this time. I love you very much. I can't wait to get back there in person. But until then, just pray for us out here. We're doing the same for you. And together, we're going to upset the world.
I certainly hope so. It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to chat with you, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you.